Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another mailbag, where I answer your questions, hot takes, observations, and ultimately your comments about tennis or anything else. You left those comments underneath my YouTube post a long time ago, and I will be answering them today, plus some comments from the Tribe community, official community platform of Monday Match Analysis, where we're talking tennis all the time, and doing exclusive live chats. The next one's going to be before Indian Wells, so make sure you join the Tribe community to participate in those. I have fallen off, unfortunately, the podcast schedule that I like to maintain, and that is because over the last 2 weeks and change, the commentary schedule has just gotten the better of me. And over the years, I've been able to manage a tight and busy commentary schedule plus the podcast. It's when you throw travel into the mix where it starts to become even more difficult into impossible. And the last 2 Sundays, I've had 15-hour travel days across, LA to London, London back to LA, plus commentary the next day. And it just hasn't been possible for me to maintain the output and the schedule that I like to. So apologies for that. But also thank you to everybody who commented online, the international audience who maybe doesn't get to hear me commentate matches on Tennis Channel, who heard me on Tennis TV last week on Buenos Aires. That was very rewarding for me, and I thank you for that. So let's get into this. All of these comments, again, they're mostly old, but still relevant. First one's from user. Hey Gil, thanks for your great AO coverage. Now that Alcaraz has won the career slam, I wanted to ask if you could rank his 7 slam runs based on how impressive they were. I know impressive can be measured in so many different ways, like winning a first slam after 3 back-to-back 5-setters, having a dominant run like the US Open 25, or going through a tough draw like Wimbledon 23. I was curious as to what things you valued in measuring the quality of a player's tournament run. Thanks as always. This is very subjective, but still a fun activity to go through. Wimbledon 23 is the top spot for me. If you just look at the final alone, Djokovic was in the midst of a phenomenal year in which he actually won the other 3 slams that season. He was unbeatable at Wimbledon. He was not losing in 5-setters, an incredible run of success in 5-setters. And the way Carlos met that moment in the 5th set of the Wimbledon final, that set the tone for the rest of his career as we know it up to this point. That was the moment, the arrival moment, and it's still, to me, the most impressive Carlos Alcaraz moment. If nothing else, because it really signified who he was and who he was set to be moving forward. And it was a great run. I think he crushed Medvedev in the semifinals that year as well. Had some good wins in the lead up. So I'm going to go Wimbledon 23. Number 2, I hate to just make it about the final, but I think you got to still go Roland Garros 2025. Just on the merit. The run up to the final was not all that memorable to me, but just on the merit of coming back from 2-0 down against Jannik Sinner and saving the championship points and winning the 5th set against a Sinner who was very game in that 5th, did not fade away by any means. Alcaraz really had to buckle down and win 3 sets in a row against a player who just wasn't losing a lot in Jannik Sinner up to that point. So I would say Roland Garros 25. At number 3, I'll give a nod to the dominance of his US Open run last year. So US Open 25, just his most efficient slam run of all time. And it's not as if the field completely deteriorated in front of him either. It was Sinner in the final. It was a decisive win over Sinner on hard court, which I'd say was a big sort of stepping stone for Alcaraz. It ended the streak that Sinner was on of 3 hardcourt majors in a row. After that, let's go to impressiveness. I think the first slam. I'll go to US Open 2022 here. And this is one that mostly stands out for physicality. He did play, of course, the 3-5 setters in the lead up to the final against Rude. He had the epic against Sinner in the quarterfinals, had to fend off match points there. He beat Tiafoe in 5, and then against Casper Ruud in the final, he certainly was tired. He didn't have the entirety of his physical energy, but was able to sort of manage that in the final and win major number 1, which is always extraordinarily important. He got that weight off his shoulders really, really quickly before any pressure or scar tissue was able to build, and that was crucial. We aren't talking about importance here. We're talking about impressiveness. But I think just the physical feat of US Open 2022 is really what sort of carries it in terms of the impressiveness. I'm going to go Roland Garros 2024 after that. Now, first off, this was Carlos coming in with a lot of question marks. First, because of his form. After winning Wimbledon the year prior, he had a tough North American hardcourt summer where he didn't play his best, got off to a shaky start in Australia with the loss to Zverev, and just couldn't build any momentum really other than, I think, an Indian Wells title. Plus physical question marks coming into Roland Garros with an arm injury that was nagging him. So at this point, the expectations were low, and I think some doubt was starting to build and circulate. And Alcaraz responds with a dominant victory over Tsitsipas in the quarters, a comeback win over Sinner in the semis from down 2-1, and then another comeback victory from down 2-1 against Sasha Zverev in the final. This was sort of a run that sticks out to me because of Alcaraz's ability to win ugly and figure out a way, but also because it's not as if he had to win ugly through the finish line. It's almost Alcaraz's ability in best of 5 to find his game eventually and to improve as a match progresses, something that's definitely been a hallmark in his career so far. And I think Roland Garros 2024 was sort of the clearest example of that. After that, I am going to go with Wimbledon 2024. I didn't feel as if the win over Djokovic in the final was all that impressive. Novak now look, it was a great performance by Alcaraz. It was just so kind of compromised on Novak's end in terms of the movement, even though Djokovic had gotten to the final. And I know it's like a very weird balance to strike there, but I think both things kind of have to be true. That's why it's a little bit lower down on the list. He beats Medvedev in the semis again. That was a good performance. Tommy Paul in the quarters. But this run, here's what I thought was impressive about this run. He had a tough draw, not in terms of necessarily how the event finished, like Tommy Paul, Medvedev, and then a compromised Djokovic. That in itself is sort of standard, but I just felt as if Frances Tiafoe and Hugo Humbert both played awesome matches against Alcaraz. That was in the 3rd round and the 4th round, respectively. And Carlos was really good in those matches to get out of trouble and win both of them in 5. Tiafoe was 5, and it was actually pretty shaky there in the 4th set. And then Humbert, he won it in 4th after Hugo was he started redlining in the 4th set. And I remember Alcaraz had to really put the clamps down late in the 4th and he had to be really good to stop that match from going 5. Am I missing any, or are we at 7? I think we may have hit all 7. Oh my God, I forgot the Australian Open. That's so funny. Okay, where does the Australian Open rank? I would nestle the Australian Open after Roland Garros 2024. So it actually doesn't rate that highly for me. You could say that because of the pressure coming in as far as winning the career Grand Slam and prioritizing the Australian Open in the larger picture of his season, I think to come in with that sort of pressure and expectation and to come away with the trophy and become the youngest player to ever win a career Grand Slam, which I still think is just this incredible accomplishment and a badass record all around. You could take that angle on it, and yes, I thought it was an impressive mental performance to handle that, the weight of history in that moment. But in terms of the actual run-up and the matches themselves, this one probably doesn't stand out too much to me. Now, the effort against Zverev, unbelievably gritty, and a showcase of what makes him such a great champion in terms of what's in his heart as a competitor. But that got dramatic because he cramped. So I don't know if we want to say this was this unbelievably impressive win. In some ways it was, but also it was a little bit self-inflicted in terms of how it got up to that point. The Djokovic win in the final, fantastic tactics, terrific level of tennis, but that's a match Alcaraz should win at the end of the day. So it doesn't rank that high in terms of impressiveness. It's not last. I still think it's more impressive than the Wimbledon run in 2024, but it is towards the bottom of the list in terms of impressiveness. Fun, though, to go through that because every single major title run has this, usually something special about it, right? All right, next one's from Evan. As Draper and Fils are due to be returning from injury imminently, what do you expect to see from them in the short term and this year as a whole? Anything you would have expected them to have worked on in their games with significant time off? Well, this is a great question because at face value, I think it's a lot to ask of a player to both improve and recover/rehab from an injury at the same time. But that seems to be what these players are doing. Props. That's impressive. But both Draper and Fils have made some noticeable technical changes while on the shelf for injury. Draper going from a pinpoint serve to a platform serve. Although, as far as platform serves go, the feet are a little bit closer together than normal, or more close together than normal. So let's start there. First off, I wasn't expecting that. That at face value is surprising because of all the things in Jack's game that I feel as if leave some room for improvement, the serve was not towards the top of my list. That said, when you look at the Tennis Insights leaderboard, he is lower than you would expect on serve quality. He is nowhere near the top 10. He actually hovers around the 30 mark in serve quality. And I would not have expected that, but that number typically doesn't really lie. I mean, it's a pretty accurate reading. If you look at the top 10, to me, it checks out. It aligns with the eye test usually pretty well for me. So I did find that interesting. But as far as holding serve is concerned, Draper ends up really high on holds rate. I can check what the number is exactly. Of course, that's no reason to not improve an area that you think can get better. I'm curious to hear why Jack was inclined to make that change. Last 52 weeks, Draper hold percentage 87.5. That ranks 5th highest after Sinner, Fritz, Alcaraz, and Bublik. So Draper's hold rate really, really good in the last 52 weeks. But yeah, he's made that adjustment on the serve. I know someone has pointed out, and I've noticed this in the past, he did have a little bit of a leak in his pinpoint stance where his left foot would actually drag up against the right foot in a way that actually opened up his hips a little bit prematurely and didn't leave as much room for rotation on the serve. So the platform stance is going to be the easiest way to fix that. I wonder, and this is totally speculative, is it possible that Jack tried to fix that in the pinpoint, struggled to fix it, and then thought, well, let's just try a different route to getting more shoulder rotation on the serve? I think that's possible because the platform is going to give him a more natural and easier path to shoulder rotation. That said, you can get great shoulder rotation from a pinpoint too. So I'm not fully convinced that that's the reason. I want to hear from Jack. It's an interesting change. The Fils change is on the forehand. I do encourage you to check out Thread of Order, Hugh Clark's great newspaper. No, not a newspaper. It's 2026 newsletter here. He talked about not the Draper serve change, but he talked about the Fils change on the forehand and also the Rune change on the forehand, which I'm going to talk about in a second, even though the comment doesn't ask me about it. The Fils forehand change is a beautiful sight. The Draper one, I'm more neutral on. I want to hear what the reasoning is, and we'll see how it goes. The Fils one is like, that is music to my ears, except you can't hear technique, you can only see technique. So it's a sight to behold, okay? I've always thought that Fis's forehand take back was just too much. Just way too big. Comically large. Unnecessary for a guy with that kind of fast twitch ability and natural explosiveness. And I just felt, as much as it allowed Fils to really stand out from the pack in terms of average speed and average spin, where Fils numerically has far and away the heaviest forehand in the world, I always still wondered, is that worth the trade-off of being more rushable, more sensitive to pace, less stable defensively, and potentially even more erratic when you do have time on the ball? And these are trade-offs that I don't really think in the long run are going to be beneficial for Fils. So the fact that he's actually just brought the hands lower, brought the elbow lower, and overall has made it a more compact forehand swing, that was always going to be necessary. And hopefully it also makes it easier for Fils to start to get a little bit more comfortable on the return, because that's been an area in quick conditions a little bit exploitable, where Fils has played a lot of matches over the years that I've observed where he's not able to really get enough returns in play to give himself a chance to break serve. So I love the change he made on the forehand while rehabbing the back issue. Ultimately, Fis's arc of development is going to be like Dominic Thiem's, where he needs to get more comfortable taking time away, defending on the forehand, returning on the forehand, making smart decisions, keeping the ball in the court, playing more physical and more consistent, and obviously maintaining the explosive weight of shot that he produces, but just adding those other elements into his game. That's the developmental path for Fils, and that technical change is going to set him on that path. It's going to be a step towards that. So really good stuff for Fils on the forehand. And then shout out to Rune also. Holger, who continues to make progress after the brutal Achilles injury, he's changed the take back on his forehand. And the biggest thing for him on the forehand is, one, the orientation of the racket face. Instead of kind of going straight up in the air, now it's more almost pointed towards the other side of the net. But more importantly, he's actually keeping that left hand on the throat of the racket longer, and that's facilitating a better coil. And I've always felt, in the past, I felt that Holger could get a little bit disconnected in his technique, in how, the hand just separates from the racket really early on. The tempo can be a little bit shaky, and then the hips and the shoulders can just open up prematurely. And I just think closing off the shoulders and coiling a little bit better could potentially help Rune's forehand. But hey, you got to see how these things play out, right? Until I see it in a match, I don't really know how I feel about that one. But I have said repeatedly, Holger's forehand, if we're measuring him up, if the standard is Sincaraz, and even if that's the standard, how does Rune win majors and get back to the top 5? The forehand hasn't been good enough in the last couple of years. That's been a massive piece to the puzzle in this question that we've been answering, I feel like, constantly for the last 2.5 years of, well, why isn't Holger world number 3 right now? That's been a part of it. That hasn't performed as an elite forehand in many, many ways. Next one from user once again. Hey Gil, I know that fatigue will be cited as one of the major reasons for Djokovic's loss to Alcaraz in the final. However, you mentioned that Alcaraz was able to enter lockdown mode that he didn't normally in the past, and this caused Djokovic to miss more and made him have to use his legs and shot making rather than just trying to out-hit Novak. This was not something we saw him do in many of his losses in the past. If this more inconsistent and erratic version of Alcaraz played this final, would he still have won it? We've seen him become rattled and especially struggle with the Djokovic matchup at times. In other words, was it only because of Carlos's more mature and experienced mindset that he was able to take advantage of Djokovic's dip after the superb first set? Or would even the past version of Carlos have been able to win due to the large advantage in physicality? Thanks for all your hard work. Yeah, thanks. So you're asking, would the old Alcaraz have lost to Djokovic in the Australian Open final? Very speculative, but potentially. I'm not gonna shove that possibility to the side, especially because Novak started to put up more resistance in the fourth set, and definitely Novak played a good enough level to potentially steal that fourth set. And when you're talking about energy conservation and physicality, once Djokovic has a finish line and adrenaline, things can change pretty quickly. That was part of the Sinner semifinal for Novak as well. Once you got into that fifth set, you felt much better about Djokovic's physicality because you knew that finish line was tantalizingly close for Novak, and you just can't separate the mind and the body when that becomes true. How often do we see a player physically collapse after, let's say, losing a tough third set to go down 2-1? Why is that? It's because the mind and the body are connected, and they realize in that moment what a steep mountain it is to climb if they're going to win a best-of-5 set match by going the distance. And that's where physically they just completely shut down and melt. So on the contrary, if Novak wins that fourth set, and now it's 2-2 in the fifth, and Djokovic starts to feel number 25 and see it, and it's potentially 40 minutes away, all he has to do is push to the limit for 40 more minutes, and the crowd is there and the adrenaline is there. You could absolutely get what we saw against Sinner, which was a physical improvement for Djokovic at that stage. Novak was stronger in the fifth set against Sinner physically than he was in the second set through the fourth set. Clearly. And that's because he saw a finish line as far as I'm concerned. And that could have happened in the final if Alcaraz wasn't so diligent in that fourth set, playing buttoned up and locked down. From Mr. Black Global. Craig Tiley has proactively suggested that best-of-5 set matches are being considered for the female players at the Australian Open. From recent interviews, it seems not to be a popular concept among WTA players. What are your thoughts on this, Gil? Would best-of-5 give the women's semi and finals an added boost in entertainment and coverage? Or will it land flat if the physical conditioning among WTA to go the distance reduces the potential positives? Well, look, I don't know what it would look like physically for the women. I just don't know. I do not pretend to know. But, all right, there's a couple of angles here. First off, I am very curious. Craig Tiley is a smart guy, very calculated guy. And news today, this was not necessarily surprising. This was rumored for many, many weeks. But Craig Tiley will become the CEO of the USTA, so he will no longer have a hand in Australian Open operations starting now, but he will very much have influence as it pertains to the US Open. I think that Tiley floated that in the media, in public, to take the temperature. I think he wanted to see what the response was going to be. That's what I would speculate, because otherwise, why would he say this? Why would he just put this out into the open if he wasn't trying to sort of gauge the public appetite for this, or the appetite on the ground among the players, because he knew by saying that, such a hot button thing, such a sort of the kind of thing that is going to get aggregated and tossed around everywhere. Craig Tiley knows that, and I think that's the very reason he said it. Ultimately, from what I can tell, the support among the players just isn't there. That said, ultimately, the dollar usually dictates how these things play out. I am not convinced that the monetary incentive is substantial enough for this to really even be a conversation anyways. There is some relationship between the duration of your product and how much money you can take in. Like, for example, if you tell a TV partner, you can expect this many hours of coverage from buying the rights to our event, versus you can expect this amount of hours of coverage plus, I don't know, tack on 8 hours over the course of 2 weeks. Okay, now maybe we can charge more. Maybe we can charge our partners more money. Maybe we can charge our sponsors a little bit more. But my sense is that the returns are pretty minute. And then there are so many questions about if it's wanted, and if the players are down for it, or if they could even really do it. I don't know the answers to those questions, but there are a lot of headwinds here. I do not anticipate that this is going to be a thing. So I'm going to leave it at that. A lot of talk right now, though, about the scheduling. Dubai, I've never seen so many walk withdrawals than what I've seen in Dubai, but ultimately, I've found the WTA scheduling to be obscene for a long, long time now. Just absolutely overpacked. It makes the ATP schedule and the calendar that the ATP implements, which players still complain about, comparatively makes it look like a cakewalk. And it's never made a ton of sense to me that you have 2 1000s in February, and then you have obviously another 2 1000s in March. Like, where's your rest period here? I mean, after Miami, there's a little bit of a break, but I'm sorry, that first 3 months is just untenable. And what you're seeing in the last few years is players who do well at the Australian Open in particular, they are not going to the Middle East. And I'll just throw this out here. The problem is not that there are, at least I don't think that by and large, the problem is that everybody's getting injured. I just don't think that's it. What I do think is happening is players are making smart business decisions about how they manage their bodies. In fact, in some cases, I've heard things. I'm not going to be specific here because it's a sensitive topic. I've heard things about certain players where maybe they're not so injured. Maybe they're not so injured that they can't play. But hopefully you don't hear the sirens outside too loud. But look, the fact is, especially when you're pulling out of a mandatory, you've got to come up with a reason. You've got to produce a reason. Otherwise, you get fined. So it's very easy for players to do that. But I just want to make that distinction. I don't think that there are 20 players injured right now in the WTA's top 75. Like, I don't buy that. What I do think is happening is they're saying, you know what? Long term, it does not make sense for me to put myself through this. And they are acting accordingly. That's what's happening here. Okay, here's a somewhat related comment from Mr. Comment. Hi, Gil. What do you think about the medical timeout rule when it comes to cramps? Technically, it's not allowed, but what's stopping a player from saying they think they have an injury or a strain and getting a medical timeout anyway, like Alcaraz versus Sinner? I think you mean Zverev, but that's okay. Do you think it would be a better option if a player is allowed a couple 3-minute timeouts per match at their own discretion without reason, where they can get physio treatment or not, kind of like they do for basketball? I personally think the current rule is kind of silly for how easy it is to manipulate and can make for some more drama by tactically playing a 3-minute timeout in tight moments. All right, we're thinking outside the box. I'm going to shut you down on this one. I don't like the idea of timeouts in tennis because I don't think we should be adding to the dead time. This is already a sport where there is some pretty significant dead time, change of ends, obviously what you get in between points and in between sets. I don't think that we should be signing up for more. It's a little better if it's like predictable. I don't mind a little bit of a break in between sets. I actually think that it's good for the in-person experience. I think sometimes it's even nice when you're sitting on the couch to get like a little bit of a intermission, so to speak. I think it's good, nice for the fans in the stadium. So I don't mind that. But to give each players a couple of timeouts where you then delay the match for 3 minutes, that to me is a nightmare in terms of pacing. And it hurts some other sports. Like the NBA is sometimes unwatchable in the last 2 minutes. I'm talking about basketball, of course, where there's just a million timeouts, a million fouls, and it's like, God, this is just a drag. So the last thing tennis wants to do is get to a point where, by the way, players would start using it tactically to ice players. I mean, I know what you're saying. It would add some drama and some strategy, but how many times would you see like, oh, she's about to serve for the match, timeout. He's about to serve for the match, timeout. Like 3 minutes. Let's make my opponent think about this for some extra time and get cold. You'd see that all the time, which I know is your point, but I think it would not be viewer friendly. So I'm going to say no to that. But the other part of your question, should there be this medical timeout rule? It is utterly unenforceable. It is more unenforceable than the coaching rule, which the ATP did away with on grounds that it was unenforceable. I'm talking about, of course, the legalization of on-court coaching. That was the logic the tour used to make on-court coaching legal. They said, we can't enforce this rule, so we shouldn't have it. Well, the medical timeout rule is that times 1,000. It is way harder to enforce that rule. The other thing that I would like the tour to maybe look at when it comes to this is I'm not convinced, other than the passage of time and rest, which is definitely one of the better remedies for cramping. There's no real treatment for it anyway. So it doesn't really bother me. Like if they allowed medical timeouts for cramping, it wouldn't bother me at all. And it's probably the way that they should go so that there's less gray area. You don't want to have a rule which basically goes on the honor code, because that's what it is. The cramping medical timeout rule is honor code. There will never be a moment in which a player calls for a medical timeout and is denied it. I'll see it when I believe it. Other way around. I'll believe it when I see it. So if that's the case, you're punishing players who are going to err on the side of caution and try to like basically honor that rule. And you're rewarding the players who might be a little more fast and loose with it, which is not great. So I understand the logic around no medical timeouts for cramping because it's a loss of conditioning and not a real injury. I get the logic, but I think in practice it makes no sense. From Marsub. Hi, Gill. I was surprised, given Sinner's comments after the U.S. Open final, to see so little variety when he played Novak in the semifinal of the AO. Alcaraz was slicing, moving to deeper return positions, and willing to defend more instead of trying to impose an aggressive baseline game at all times. Yet Sinner didn't adapt at all, played almost no drop shots in spite of being successful, and was always super aggressive on the return, which meant he failed to put many in play. Just check his break points. My question is, why was he playing with no variety? In the past few months, we have seen him try different approaches, and now that it actually matters, he reverted to his previous style. And do you think he should continue focusing on variety or disregard this experiment and just improve his strengths, as you often suggest players do? I also wanted to ask if you have any thoughts on Moise Kwame. He just qualified for the main draw of Montpellier and is coached by Gaz K. Kwame, I'm not going to go too in depth on Kwame. I actually did call one of his matches, but he's got really good pace on the forehand, awesome movement, open stance backhand is excellent. he's really good for his age. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to go too in depth. I got to watch him more, and it's so early. I'm just not that interested in doing a super detailed breakdown. But let's talk about the Sinner comment. You're asking me why he didn't play with more variety. I'm actually sympathetic to Sinner in this case. He's beaten Djokovic 5 times in a row, 10 sets in a row. If you think about the moments in which Jannik has made big adjustments from a strategy standpoint, and this is not unique to Jannik, it's true for most tennis players, the impetus of these tactical adjustments are failures. You often don't adjust in success. You adjust as a result of failure. The famous term, you either win or you learn. And Sinner is playing a guy who plays something that looks very close to his style, and strength to strength, toe to toe, Sinner had been, I'll use the D word, I'll say dominating. Certainly on serve, he dominated. Not to say that they didn't play plenty of close sets, but Sinner had won 10 sets in a row. So, of course, he felt as if he could play his stock, comfortable style against Novak, and that would be good enough for him to win. Plus, he was a front runner for most of that semifinal match. It's not like he went down 2 sets to love and he had to have this moment of, okay, I better change something radically because whatever I'm doing is not going to be good enough for me to win this match. I think Sinner the whole way through felt that he could win the match in his comfort zone. He could play the very, standard comfortable point in playing. So I would mostly defend Sinner in that respect. I think where he went wrong is not recognizing potentially the physical advantage that he had and just making sure to keep it a little bit cleaner in some of the important rallies in the 5th set. That's to me where he went wrong, because Djokovic locked it down and Sinner definitely in that moment was like, he put his foot on the gas pedal and tried to make things happen in those moments. And he didn't need to be as aggressive as he was, I don't think. I know hindsight's 2020. If he makes those balls, we probably don't say the same thing. Of course we don't. But I said this on Monday. Novak was playing deep middle, and I felt Sinner should have just said, if you're going to do that, I'll just do it back, and let's see who cracks first. And I think it would have been Novak to crack first, but he did play into Novak's hands a little bit by just trying to create angle from the middle of the court, something that he's not that comfortable doing, and he made some errors. That's what happened in the big moments. Now, would he love to get to a point where he's more comfortable, or it's more automatic for him, it's more deeply ingrained for Sinner to start to play drop shots and to play some, let's say, more variation of height, and maybe you chip a backhand and maybe you play a high ball off the forehand and you do things to sort of change rhythm and try to, instead of kind of going strength to strength, maybe try to take some of Djokovic's comfort away. Yeah, that would probably be helpful for Sinner in the long run, and that's why he's working on it. But I am sympathetic to a tennis player who has literally dominated a head-to-head to say that they should have realized that they needed to do something completely different right in that moment. I think discounts a lot of the psychological dynamics that would have realistically been at play. Okay. Really long comment here. I don't know if I want to read the whole thing. Maybe I'll stop at some point, but it's from Lemonius. I know it got a lot of likes, and it's a really good one. Hi, Gill. I want to ask you about Sinner and what your thoughts are regarding a specific aspect of his mentality and technical abilities. It's very clear that against 99.9% of players, Sinner can trust his mind and his game to see him through tight situations without faltering. For example, the ridiculous streak of tiebreak wins he went on against the field over the course of 2024, and his remarkably maintained consistency of wins against any players not named Alcaraz. However, off the back of this assuredly difficult to swallow loss against Djokovic, I feel that there are some questions that we could start to explore aside from his sub-elite stamina and poor record in 5-set matches. Now, I don't think this match was a perfect case of what I want to discuss, but such an unexpected loss invites us to look at any concerns we may have around Jannik overall. I'm going to skip this paragraph and go, so basically my question is, what magic can Sinner summon to rival Carlos's big-time play? If Alcaraz is going to execute supposedly inadvisable drop shots, net rushes, and changes of direction with absolute perfection every time they play a deciding moment in a big match, what unpredictability could Jannik come up with himself to surprise and outplay him? Would it be use of short angles and width, or some flashy returning, or his best chance to completely commit to out-soliding him, or just to pour even more into winning efficiently so that he can continue to avoid reaching these moments in the first place? Yeah, it's a great question. Like, how should Sinner play under pressure? What's his go-to? I don't think that Jannik, and it's correct to point out that this is not a large picture problem for Sinner. It's a problem maybe over the course of the year. It's a problem maybe 1 or 2% of the time where he finds himself usually against Carlos in a big moment. But okay, I mean, it's a great question, right? What can he rely on when all of the chips are down? How should he play? What's his go-to? What's his thing? You frame this as a tactical problem, though, and I would slightly caution against that. I think it's fair to explore the tactical question that you're asking. What should Sinner be trying to do out there? But there's also a mental dynamic to it. Sinner has a history early in his career of struggling with nerve management, at least to my eyes, of observing his first few years on tour. I always felt as if arm could get a little bit shaky in a big moment, and he became more error-prone under pressure. Alcaraz never really saw that once. I saw him get overly excited and overwhelmed at times where he maybe wouldn't make smart decisions on court, but I never necessarily saw him get overly tight as if he was stricken with nerves in a way that sort of shelled him up a little bit. I've seen that more often throughout Sinner's career. I wouldn't necessarily always say that it's because, or I would suggest that it's not usually a matter of Jannik not having answers tactically, but just being a little bit more human, a little bit more vulnerable to the effects of nerves in a big moment. That said, when you have uncertainty or cloudiness of, well, I'm trying to be more brave, but wait, then what does that look like? And am I not now am I not playing to my strengths? When you have cloudiness in terms of what you're actually trying to do, that obviously can exacerbate the issue. I still feel as if when Sinner is at his best under pressure, he's able to just bring massive pace into big targets without missing. And when he was like feeling invincible in 2024, for example, what I saw on big points is even faster feet, even faster racket head acceleration, and even more discipline in the shot selection. Those are the three things I saw. Even bigger ball speed, and just the way when the intensity of Sinner's footwork is at its highest, he has such a terrific ability to get sort of positive body weight through the ball on each and every shot. And Sinner at his best, that's what it looks like in my head. It's a relentless barrage of pace into big targets, disciplined targets, and he goes all day, he doesn't miss, and you never really get anything to work with. And obviously, if you get rushed into dropping the ball short, of course, he can be lethal from those positions. Carlos has sort of taken that away from him with the defense, and sometimes just being able to just take the pace and not be very affected by it. Really starting after that Wimbledon final, Because before then, like in the Wimbledon final, that play worked for Sinner. Bold and aggressive second serves have worked for Sinner in big moments, both in the Wimbledon final and in the ATP finals victory against Carlos. So being braver has worked, but braver how? Braver how? I don't think forcing net rushes is a great idea. I don't think forcing drop shots is going to be an answer. I do think going after returns could be a good thing to implement if it's there. But ultimately, I think when Sinner executes, he's good enough. I don't think that this is some sort of crisis of Sinner's best is not good enough, and therefore he needs to go into the lab and sort of reinvent the way he plays in big moments. I think the reason why he's sometimes come up short is either he is there were periods of time where I felt he actually pulled back on the pace. So that is the fear of a big moment against Carlos actually taking away from his regular game. So he pulls back on the pace and he gets hurt for that. So I think making sure that doesn't happen is priority number one. And then there have been other moments in which maybe like against Novak, I don't think he necessarily played the wrong way, but the execution went awry on him. And it did start to become a nerve management thing for Sinner, especially with the break points being in his head. The breakpoint conversion being such a bugaboo for him. Even if Djokovic saved many of them on his own terms and played those points very well, it still gets into Sinner's head at a certain point. I hope that was a good answer. I know it wasn't super like clear cut or simple on my end, but nuanced question, no obvious answer. That's as good as I can do there. From anonymous tennis follower, hi Gill, as an Iga fan, I am concerned about the pattern that some of her losses seem to follow. As you pointed out on Twitter, she's lost 6 of her last 8 matches against top 10 competition. Also, according to Juan Ignacio on Twitter, Iga has lost 16 sets by a 1-6, 0-6 scoreline since the start of last year, compared to only 7 during her prime years of 2022 through 2024. So much for a player known for giving out such sets. It seems to me that despite short bursts of brilliance, her game has declined in some areas, and she has a higher tendency to panic on court. From what you have observed about Iga, what do you think her biggest issues are right now? I wrote my own thoughts in a reply down below. Okay. What do I think are her biggest issues right now? Well, she's definitely in between. She's in between identities and struggling to find a confident and comfortable balance between the two of trying to be the opposing aggressive player that hugs the baseline, plays a lot of ball speed, changes direction a lot, and ends up dictating a ton from the middle of the court versus a player that, and this is where Wim Fizette has sort of pushed her towards at least exploring this more as an option, give a little bit more ground, use the world-class speed, play with a little bit more height and shape at times, and make sure to be the more solid player. Iga has not been able to go out on court and commit to that. Let's face it, in these losses, who's making more errors in these losses? Iga is. Iga's beating herself in big moments, making, critical unforced errors. That's what's happening. So she has not been able to dial back the aggression a little bit and actually commit to playing a more like solid game. And she's lost a little bit of confidence probably when she actually tries to play her aggressive game. And it's become a bit of an identity crisis, as is usually the case when a player is struggling. But I think at the root of the problem, and the reason why she hasn't been able to commit to playing more percentage tennis, I think the root of the problem is she can't accept that sometimes her opponent is too good. No, I'm not saying she has to accept it over the course of a season or over the course of a match, but on a point in and point out basis, it seems to me that when she plays, especially a big hitter like Rybakina, and let's say Elena hits a winner on a backhand down the line, just for an example, Iga in her head, she registers that as, okay, failure, unacceptable, must prevent that from happening again. And now it's, I am fighting that with aggression. I am fighting that with, I must take that away. She doesn't seem to have, and this is so necessary when you play certain players on the WTA tour who go after the ball and they are going to, sometimes they're going to be too good with their power game, and you've got to hang in there and accept that on a handful of points, your process is correct, but the outcome is going to be bad. It doesn't seem like Iga can sort of trust the process because she reacts so negatively to when she is dictated to. That's kind of what I'm seeing. In other words, if I hit a good, deep cross-court ball and my opponent responds with a winner down the line, sometimes I need to have the bigger picture perspective to say, I didn't do anything wrong there. I played the right way. The process was correct. And my opponent just happened to win that point. But if I do that over the course of this entire match, they're not going to execute that shot over and over and over again. And this is actually a pathway for me to win. Instead of reacting so sort of defiantly when a player hits a winner against you, where it's like, I can't let this happen. I must respond by dictating on the next point, because otherwise my opponent might hit another winner. It just doesn't seem, it seems like Iga just hates to be hit through, which is an obstacle for her psychologically. And I think it prevents her from playing like clear-headed sound tactics that maximize, let's say, her percentage tennis. But also, there are technical improvements that it seems like she just hasn't really been able to, she hasn't been able to continue with that arms race, right? So Sabalenka, for example, has improved on the serve and improved on the forehand consistency and improved on the volleys and added a drop shot. Iga, she's needed to improve the serve, hasn't really been able to successfully do it. Forecourt play, hasn't been able to successfully do it. Like return of serve and I guess like forehand defense, that's another area. Hasn't really been able to make gains in that respect. So that's another part of it, is just the ability to win the technical arms race against a player like Sabalenka. Next one is from Matt. Hey, Gill, now that the Tien hype is at an all-time high, I think it will be important to see whether a natural pace absorber who doesn't really possess much power could still get to the elite of the game in the powerful pace generation ruled era of tennis we are currently living in. In the last 20 years, between Fed, Rafa, Jannik, Carlos, and even Novak in his later years, we have enjoyed fast and heavy forehands, which got them to the peak of the rankings. Could the Tiens and Menshiks of the world start a more consistency-oriented shift in the elite of our sport, or are the powerful, winner-generating shots still necessary to get there? Well, what level are we talking about? First off, I would argue that even though Zverev and Medvedev are very different as athletes compared to Tien, and they've got massive serves, which Tien doesn't. I still think at the end of the day, you have seen players consistently in the top 8 who aren't huge hitters off the ground. And De Minaur, you can now add De Minaur to that. He has now made the year-end championships 2 years in a row, and he is one of the softer hitters off the ground. Tommy Paul has been another experiment. He's so good in so many areas. Elite mover, extremely well-rounded, great transition game, very fit, pretty tactical, but he's a soft hitter off the ground. We see sort of where he has leveled out in his career over the last few years. Of course, trying to level up, but we've kind of seen where he's at. But yeah, Medvedev and Zverev are good examples, I think, at a higher level. So I don't necessarily think, I agree with the overall sentiment that Tien is going to serve as a fascinating experiment as we move towards even a further generation, a generation that extends past the guys who I'm talking about, of can a player who actually probes from the back of the court, maneuvers the ball, plays with primarily depth and ball placement and point construction and the ability to take time away, how far can somebody take that style? Here's the thing. If you're talking about the elite of the game, if we're having a tier 1 conversation, I think there's only one answer, which is that's not good enough. Because the only thing I've seen in the last, well, I'll just say this, the only thing I've seen since I was born, since I started following this game, is the very, very, very best players. They are going to be able to do it all. They are going to be elite offensively, defensively, from neutral, probably off of both wings. They are going to bring firepower. They're going to bring consistency. They're going to bring a level of well-roundedness. So to me, the only answer is all of the above. And if you're a player in Tien, if he does not develop a little bit more power in his game, then he'll never be an all of the above player. He'll be he's great at that, but he's not great at that. And I'm sorry, that's not consistent, other than the fact that I think underpowered serves have been able to sort of, like, players have been able to overcome that to a certain extent, especially the physical prime years of Djokovic, the physical prime years of Nadal, to an extent, Andy Murray. Other than that, like, let's look at the players who have dominated and then throw Alcaraz and Sinner into the mix. There are not trade-offs here. They are great at every level. They are great in every aspect. In the larger picture, it doesn't mean they're amazing at every single thing. Like, we're not maxing out all the attributes here, but certainly if you take a large scale sort of framework of defense, neutral, offense, yeah, like they're going to be tier 1, A++, 10 out of 10 in all three phases. And right now, I think Tien is basically already an elite player from neutral and probably still needs to get better offensively and defensively. But particularly offensively, that's going to be the main focus. All right. Here's one from Tribe. It's from Gene. Hi, Gill. Are there any names you're watching this year in the hope they emerge from the challengers to compete on the main tour? It's a good question. Any challengers guys I have my eye on? I mean, there are always plenty, but I don't know if you're talking in terms of hope, as in I want them to do well because they are entertaining, or I am predicting them to make the leap, because those would be two different questions. But if I can just pull up the rankings here and have a little bit of a look. So like people who I'm entertained by, like I'm always entertained by Mattia Bellucci and Shintaro Mochizuki and Yoshi Nishioka right now, who's well outside the top 150. These are guys who are entertaining to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are, potentially the most obvious candidates to make big moves in 2026 and transition to the main tour. Guys to watch, guys to keep a close eye on, I'd say, for their potential. to some extent, Elmer Moeller, who's got massive holes in his game, but does have one of the most special shots that you'll see at any level, which is his two-handed backhand. Rafael Hodar, well documented, but his results over the course of the last 6 months signal a very, very special player at 19 years old. Martin Daum has enormous lefty weapons. He has got a bomb of a serve, a cannon of a forehand. He's never really going to be a very good mover, but if he can polish the offensive game, he may be able to overcome it. He's obviously going to be a high holds rate, low break rate guy, but I think he has the potential long-term to do it at a pretty high level. Who else? See how Nicholas Jarry sort of, he's only 30 years old. See how much he still has in the tank, and he hasn't really been the same since that ear infection. So it's going to be curious to see what he does this year. Michael Zhang, of course, out of Colombia, still in college, so he's not going to play a full schedule, but he was, of course, awesome at the Australian Open. From Peter, this is from Tribe. Gill, in your opinion, for someone as elite as Alcaraz, what percentage of coaching just becomes a mental, psychological thing versus actual technique? That completely depends on the player and what their setup is. Some players may feel as if the coach should play a large role in their psychology work. Other players might hire somebody else to do the psychology and ask their coach to worry about coming up with tactics and running practice sessions and training sessions. So that could completely vary from player to player, I would say. Look, it's so individualized in terms of what the player's setup is. And you said someone for as elite as Alcaraz, but of course it also has to do with what are the resources that a player has, because you better believe that at a lower level, the coach may take on cast a wider net of responsibilities versus at a higher level when players have larger entourages, aka larger staffs of people. Maybe they can be a little bit more specialized. Like, this is something that I don't know a ton about, but like I imagine, I know top players usually have a trainer and a physio, and these are separate people. But then I would assume for others, the trainer and the physio that's the same person. So it's very much how you want to set it up. From I'm Frostbite. Hi, Gil. What do you make of the relative lack of upsets at this year's AO? For me personally, it feels like the depth on tour is as good as ever. Is it something about seeded players being in better shape at the start of the season, or just a quirk of this year's tournament? P.S. Love the show. So historically, these are numbers that have been fleshed out. I know there's a account on X, I think it's called Nishi Betting Tips, who actually published the data recently about basically which majors are most profitable for upsets from like a betting standpoint. But that obviously gives you a good idea of how many upsets there are in earnest. And the two slams that have fewer upsets, relatively speaking, would be the Australian Open and Roland Garros. And then there are far more upsets at Wimbledon and the US Open. And this is a trend that holds pretty firm on a year-to-year basis. Of course, the surface is pretty similar, Australian Open and US Open. So to me, yes, it's just calendar spot. Guys are healthy, guys are fresh. So you're not going to see as many examples of the more talented player maybe losing to the less talented player because the favorite, aka the better player, wasn't feeling well or physically had some stuff dragging down their level in a way that they weren't able to overcome. It's not usually as extreme as it was this year, of course, but that has something to do with the law of averages. And if you have a tournament that already is going to be less upset prone typically, then when it's on the extreme end of that, it's really, really extreme. And that's what it was this year at the Australian Open. Hey, Gil, you've been talking for a while about the idea of absorbing the opponent's pace, with Novak being the cleanest or the clearest modern example of this skill. Throughout tennis history, there have been many unrushable players who could absorb and redirect pace with ease. Davydenko, Agassi, Medvedev, de Minaur, among others. My question is, what exactly sharpens this ability? Is it primarily about perfect timing, consistently taking the ball early on the rise, exceptional lower body balance and stability, having a very short, compact, and repeatable swing? Or is it really a combination of all these elements working together? And ultimately, is this skill something that can be trained and developed in a player who doesn't naturally start with that innate feel or talent for it? Yeah, it can absolutely be trained. Early on in the mailbag, I talked about Arthur Fils making a technical adjustment. I talked about Dominic Thiem working on abbreviating his technique. In the case of the backhand, it was usually going to the slice, but when it came to the forehand, he learned to abbreviate his forehand technique so he could be better on the return of serve, so that he could hug the baseline to take time away and not feel as rushed on a hard court. Can definitely be worked on, but there's a lot to it. One of the more under-discussed aspect of this is you've got to have quick feet in a lot of cases. The only reason why de Minaur can take the ball as early as he does, hug the baseline as well as he does, is because his feet are quick enough to get in position, shot in and shot out, because his feet are absolute lightning. It would be very hard for a player like Zverev. Everybody talks about the big long swings. Even outside of that, forget the long swings. It might take him an extra beat, and he's not the slowest feet in the world. You can find other examples that might be even more difficult, but you got to get your feet organized very, very quickly when the ball's coming fast. And that is part of it. That's the one thing that you didn't list in your comment, but the other stuff that you mentioned, a lot of it's very, very relevant here. A short, compact swing, that is relevant. The more there is to unwind in your technique, the longer it takes to unwind it, the harder it is when the ball's coming fast. I'll give you an example. I think this is going to help some people visualize it. Sometimes players who have a lot to unwind in serve technique, they have to toss the ball higher to give themselves time to kind of hit those technical checkpoints so that they're able to get off their serve. Players with more compact serve technique that's a little bit quieter and more direct and maybe more abbreviated, they give themselves the ability to toss the ball lower. It's the same principle for a ground stroke, except you don't get to choose how high you toss the ball. Sometimes the ball is going to come slower. Sometimes the ball is going to come faster. You can do things to buy yourself time tactically and positionally, but sometimes you're just at the mercy of what it is. And that's why it's so important that, players have the skill to be able to perform when they're stripped of time. I also think the body, the lower, the stronger base, the lower center of gravity, and the good balance is a key aspect here. That's something I've had to work on a lot. Sometimes when the ball's coming pretty quickly for me, one of my issues has been I will sort of kind of come up out of the shot a little bit early instead of sort of staying through it and making sure that I've still got some positive body weight through the ball. I'll maybe kind of fall back a little bit, which I don't have to do. It's just a bad habit. So if I were really serious about taking that out of my game, yeah, I would train against quicker balls and just focus on executing with my balance in a way that's more positive. Pegula, by the way, Pegula could not be more textbook. And I think she's the best pace absorber on the WTA Tour. Talk about somebody who creates a sturdy base and does not ever fall off balance regardless of how quickly the ball's coming in. or with how much speed it's coming in. It's remarkable what Jess Pegula is able to do as a pace absorber. Plus, yeah, very streamlined technique as well. All of that. Technology, racket technology can help as well in terms of pace absorbing. Usually, like, stability, like racket stability is a big thing. All right. Want to end on a fun one? Let's do it. Who will retire first? Nick Kyrgios versus Bernard Tomic. Tomic. Yeah. Do you know why? Because Tomic, he's loving that challenger lifestyle. I mean, he is just kicking it, isn't he? Whereas Nick, let me see something here. When's the last time Nick has played a challenger? Nick Kyrgios last played a challenger in 2014. And he is world number 749 right now. So I don't know what the plan is for Kyrgios. I've been genuinely confused about what the plan is for the last, honestly, like year and a half. Beats me. But looks like Bernie Tomic is going to outlast one Nick Kyrgios. Nick's only 30, but we all know sort of what the dynamics are with his body and how he treated it for much of his career. Tomic is 33. He's at 187 right now. But he's been outside the top 100 every year since 2018. So he's like really settled into this sort of consistent challenger level player, which is honestly kind of cool for a guy who did taste the limelight, the spotlight that comes with being a top 20 player, career high 17 in 2016. Yeah, kind of interesting. And I would love to read like a Bernard Tomic autobiography or some sort of good, well done doc on Bernard Tomic, because the guy is truly fascinating. So on that note, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do another mailbag in just a few days from now to try to make up for lost time. I think that's what I'm going to do. I've thought about maybe like booking a guest and doing an interview for Friday, but no, I'm going to do another mailbag because that's what I'm going to do. All right. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. So look out for that post. I'll see you next time.